Hey guys. Tonight we wander into a London evening where the gaslights blink awake like fireflies trapped in glass. And you find yourself wondering why everyone keeps handing you a glass of milk. You step onto the pavement as dusk settles, boots tapping a rhythm that feels older than your worries, and the city exhales a warm, bovine-scented breath from dairies, kitchens, and street carts. You probably won't survive this, by which I mean, you probably won't survive trying to stay awake while Victorian London gently conspires to lull you into bed with routine, ritual, and lactose. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, post your location and local time down below. Insomnia loves company. And tonight you're in good hands. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a street just as the lamplighter finishes his rounds. The gas flames hum softly, a steady whisper that feels like the city clearing its throat before bedtime. In this moment, milk is not a beverage you gulp in the morning or pour over cereal you don't have yet, it's medicine. That's the mainstream fact you keep hearing as you drift past shop windows, doctors, pamphlets, and well-meaning aunts all agree that warm milk, taken slowly in the evening, can encourage sleep. You're told it settles the nerves, quiets the stomach, and persuades the mind to stop its endless accounting of the day. You take a sip, and it's bland, comforting, and somehow ceremonial. You walk, because the walk is part of it. A milk walk, they call it, as if naming the thing makes it work better. You stroll after supper, glass or mug in hand, letting digestion and distraction do the gentle work. The city around you is busy but not frantic, horse hooves clop. A carriage rattles, a shopkeeper shutters his door with care. The milk cools slightly as you walk, and you're instructed not to rush. Rushing, they say, wakes the nerves. You smile, because even now, in your modern bones, that sounds suspiciously accurate. The ritual has layers. Milk is easy to obtain in London, thanks to a web of dairies and early morning deliveries that begin long before you wake. The milkmaids rise in the dark, and by dusk, the milk feels like it's traveled the entire day to meet you here. There's comfort in that arc, morning to evening, pasture to cup, and you sense how Victorians leaned on such narratives. Sleep, after all, was something you earned by aligning yourself with natural rhythms, or at least that's what the advice books claimed. You pass a chemist's window displaying bottles and powders, and the milk seems refreshingly simple by comparison. No bitter tinctures, no alarming instructions, just warmth and patience. The quirky tidbit whispered among neighbors is that milk taken from a calm cow works better than milk from a nervous one. People argue about this in drawing rooms with straight faces, as if bovine emotions might travel through the pail and into your dreams. You nod solemnly, because it's easier than laughing, and besides, the idea of a serene cow feels oddly soothing. As you walk, you notice how the gaslight pulls on the pavement, creating islands of amber glow separated by shadows. The rhythm of light and dark mirrors the advice you've been given, exposure followed by withdrawal, stimulation followed by rest. You're told not to read anything too exciting after your milk, not to argue, not to plan. You're told to let the evening taper. Historians still argue whether these routines genuinely improved sleep or simply offered a comforting illusion of control. But standing here with the milk warming your hands, you feel the illusion doing its work. A light joke slips in as you nearly trip over a curb, distracted by the thought that your entire sleep strategy hinges on dairy and strolling. You recover, chuckling quietly, and imagine explaining this to your future self armed with blackout curtains and phone settings. Another joke follows when you realize that if milk truly cured insomnia, Londoners would be the most rested people on earth, and yet the city still yawns. The third comes when you consider the alternative cures you've overheard. Counting sheep is impractical in the city. But counting gaslights, that you could manage. The milk itself becomes a character in your evening. Warmed gently, never boiled. It's said to contain properties that encourage calm. Some claim it releases a sleepy essence when heated. Others insist the warmth alone is the trick. A fringe belief floats by that adding a pinch of nutmeg makes it more potent. Though no one agrees on how much. You take another sip and decide not to complicate things. Simplicity, you're learning, is half the cure. You turn down a quieter street where the noise thins, and you notice how your steps slow without instruction. This is the ritual working on you, not as a command but as an invitation. The city hasn't gone to sleep yet, but it's preparing, and you're allowed to prepare with it. Windows glow softly, curtains are drawn, and somewhere a piano practices a scale that never quite resolves. You feel a gentle solidarity with everyone else performing their own small ceremonies against wakefulness. There's a moral undertone humming beneath it all, a suggestion that good sleep reflects good living. If you can't sleep, perhaps you've strayed, worked too late, eaten too much, thought too hard. Milk at dusk is an act of correction, a way back to the straight path. You smile again, because the idea is quaint and a little unfair, but undeniably comforting. It gives you something to do that isn't worrying. As the walk nears its end, the milk is finished, and your hands are free. You breathe in the night air, tinged with coal smoke and something sweet you can't quite name. The gaslights continue their patient glow, and you feel the day loosening its grip. Whether or not milk truly contains a secret key to sleep, you understand why Victorians trusted it. It's gentle, available, and asks very little of you beyond slowing down. You head home, the ritual complete, carrying with you the sense that sleep begins long before the bed. It begins here, at dusk, with a warm cup, a measured pace, and a city willing to dim itself if you're willing to follow. The door closes softly behind you, and the evening, like the milk, has done what it can. You're still moving forward from that milk-warmed dusk, and now the walk itself becomes the prescription. Not a brisk march, not a purposeful commute. This is something softer, something doctors with impressive beards and careful handwriting insist upon. You imagine yourself pausing outside a consulting room where a Victorian physician adjusts his spectacles and recommends, with absolute seriousness, that you stroll after supper. The mainstream fact settles in. Many Victorian doctors believed gentle walking in the evening aided digestion and calmed the nervous system, which in turn encouraged sleep. You're instructed to keep your pace even, your posture upright, and your thoughts, this is the tricky part, pleasant. So you walk. The pavement feels smoother now, as if the city itself has decided to cooperate. You pass couples arm in arm, solitary figures with hands clasped behind their backs, and the occasional doctor doing his own prescribed therapy, proving by example that he practices what he prescribes. There's a rhythm to it, step, breath, glance at the shop windows going dark one by one. You notice how walking gives your mind something simple to do, a repetitive task that leaves less room for the kind of thoughts that like to rehearse themselves at midnight. Victorian medical journals talk about the dangers of overexcited nerves, a phrase that sounds judgmental and sympathetic at the same time. Too much thinking, too much stimulation, too much ambition, any of these could leave you staring at the ceiling. The walk is meant to smooth those edges. You're told to avoid lively conversation, which feels unfair if you've brought a friend. But rules are rules. A light joke drifts in as you imagine shushing someone mid-sentence because your doctor said so. Another comes when you realize this is essentially a sanctioned excuse to avoid washing dishes. The third arrives when you consider how many miles of London must have been worn smooth by people pacing themselves into sleep. There's a quirky tidbit you overhear from a man leaning against a lamppost. Some doctors specify exactly 15 minutes of walking. No more, no less, as if sleep responds to a stopwatch. Others insist the walk must end before true darkness falls, lest the chill wake you up again. You nod thoughtfully, pretending you'll remember the exact timing later. Historians still argue whether these precise instructions were based on observation or simply gave patients something concrete to cling to. But you can feel the appeal of certainty in a restless world. As you continue, the walk becomes a bridge between the public and the private. You're leaving behind the day's obligations without yet confronting the bed. This middle space is important. It lets the body wind down gradually, like a clock that doesn't appreciate being stopped abruptly. You're aware of your breathing now, slower, deeper, and the way your shoulders drop without being told. The city's sounds soften into a background murmur, a kind of accidental ambient track. Doctors of the era often frame the walk as moral hygiene as much as physical. A disciplined evening routine reflects a disciplined mind. You smile at that, feeling both seen and slightly judged across the centuries. Still, there's something reassuring about the idea that sleep can be coaxed with small, repeatable actions rather than dramatic interventions. You don't need a miracle, just a path and a bit of time. You turn onto a quieter street, where the gaslights are spaced farther apart, and shadows linger longer between them. Here, the walk feels almost meditative. You become aware of your own footsteps again, the soft scuff of leather on stone. Each step is a tiny agreement with the night. Yes, I'm slowing down, yes, I'm ready. You think back to the milk cooling in your stomach and realize how these cures stack gently, one on top of another, rather than insisting on immediate results. A physician's voice echoes in your imagination, advising against walking too late or too fast, warning that overexertion defeats the purpose. There's always a balance to be struck, Too little movement leaves the body restless, too much wakes it up entirely. You find a comfortable middle ground without much effort, which feels like a small victory. You didn't have to force it, the walk found its own pace. The city seems to notice. Windows are dark now, curtains drawn, and even the carriages sound more subdued. You pass a park gate closed for the night and imagine the grass inside resting as well. Dew forming quietly while no one is looking. The idea that everything around you is also preparing for sleep makes your own drowsiness feel communal rather than personal. You're not failing at wakefulness, you're succeeding at rest. As the walk comes to a natural end, you don't feel jolted or instructed to stop. You simply arrive. The door to your lodging appears, familiar and unthreatening, and you realize the walk has done exactly what it promised, not knocked you unconscious, but gently escorted you closer to that edge. Whether Victorian doctors truly understood the mechanics behind it or not, you can't deny the effect. Your thoughts are quieter, your body heavier, and the night feels less like an obstacle and more like an invitation. You step inside, carrying the calm of the street with you, and the idea settles in that sleep, like walking, is something you approach rather than chase. You don't stop the evening when you step indoors, you change its soundtrack. The door closes, the city drops to a muffled hush, and suddenly there it is, the clock. Not just any clock, but a dependable Victorian timepiece with a heartbeat you can hear. Tick, tick, tick. You notice it immediately, even if you pretend not to. The sound is steady, confident, and unbothered by your thoughts. This is intentional. The mainstream fact slides in as naturally as the ticking itself. Many Victorians believed rhythmic, predictable sounds could calm the mind and encourage sleep, and clocks were the most reliable rhythm available. You set your hat down, carefully, because even small acts feel ceremonial now, and sit where the sound is neither too loud nor too faint. Doctors and advice manuals warn against silence, which they consider suspicious and unsettling, like a pause in conversation that lasts too long. Silence invites thoughts, ticking crowds them out. You listen as if you're learning a new language. One syllable repeated forever. Tick for the present moment. Tick for the next. Nothing urgent. Nothing sharp. Some households take this idea further. You hear about metronomes placed on bedside tables, their pendulums swaying like tiny, obedient moons. The idea is the same. Rhythm equals reassurance. There's a quirky tidbit circulating among the well-read that clocks should tick slightly slower at night to better match the body's descent into rest. No one can quite explain how to adjust them, but the suggestion alone seems to help. You imagine fiddling with gears at midnight and laugh quietly, because the cure might wake you more than the problem. You lie back, eyes open, letting the ceiling blur. The clock does not care whether you sleep or not, and that indifference is oddly comforting. Unlike people, it doesn't judge, it doesn't sigh, it just continues. You realize how much of insomnia is about watching time pass and resenting it. Here, time passes anyway, but without commentary. Historians still argue whether the ticking truly soothed restless minds or merely gave them something else to focus on. But in this moment, focus feels like relief. The Victorians talk about the nervous system as if it's a delicate instrument that can be tuned. Too much excitement throws it off key, steady sounds bring it back into harmony. You picture your nerves as strings, gradually slackening with each tick. It's not dramatic, it's incremental, the kind of change you only notice when you stop checking for it. A light joke drifts in as you wonder what happens if the clock stops. Does your nervous system panic? Do you wake up in terror, shouting for a repairman? Another follows when you imagine a house full of clocks ticking at different speeds. A chaotic orchestra sabotaging everyone's sleep. The third arrives when you consider how modern white noise machines are essentially fancy electric descendants of this very idea. Same goal, fewer gears. You shift slightly, finding a position that lets the sound sit comfortably in your awareness. Advice columns suggest not placing the clock too close, lest it become oppressive, or too far, lest it fade and leave you alone with your thoughts. Balance again, always balance. The clock is there to accompany you, not dominate you. You let your breathing fall into step with it without trying. In, out, tick, tick. There's a debate simmering beneath the surface of these recommendations. Some physicians warn that sensitive individuals might fixate on the ticking, turning comfort into irritation. Others argue that irritation itself reveals an overexcited mind in need of even more routine. You smile at the circular logic. Either way, the solution seems to involve doing less rather than more, and that's a philosophy you can get behind at this hour. The room is dim, curtains drawn, the gaslight turned low or off entirely. Without much visual input, sound takes on extra weight. The ticking fills the space like a soft scaffold, holding the night together. You think back to the gaslights outside, their gentle hum, and realize how Victorians layer these sensory cues. Light fades, movement slows, sound simplifies. Each step removes one more excuse for wakefulness. You're aware of time passing, but it feels different now. It's not something you're measuring, it's something you're riding. The clock does the counting so you don't have to. That's the gift. You let go of the urge to check how long you've been lying there. Because the answer no longer matters. The process is underway. Some fringe thinkers suggest that clocks near the bed can influence dreams, imprinting their rhythm onto the images you see when you finally drift off. You imagine dreaming in steady intervals, scenes changing on the tick, like slides in a lantern show. The idea is strange enough to be charming, and you decide you wouldn't mind if it were true. Your eyelids grow heavier, not suddenly, but with a politeness that feels very Victorian indeed. The ticking continues, unfazed by your fading awareness. It doesn't rush you, it doesn't congratulate itself, it simply persists. You sense how much trust that requires, trust that if you create the right conditions, sleep will eventually arrive without being summoned. As you hover there, somewhere between thought and rest, you understand why this cure endured. It's accessible, affordable, and quietly effective for many. Whether the clock truly calms the nerves or merely distracts them long enough for fatigue to take over may be up for debate. But you're content not to settle it tonight. The sound has done its job. It has given the night a shape. You drift closer to the edge, the ticking softening into something less distinct. And the room seems to breathe with you. Time keeps moving, but you no longer feel required to follow it. For now, it's enough to let it pass. You don't wake up so much as drift into a new layer of thought. The ticking's still present but less demanding now, like a polite guest who has stopped clearing his throat. Somewhere between wakefulness and rest, a distinctly Victorian idea slides into your awareness. Insomnia is not just a condition, it's a character flaw. Or at least, that's how many people around you quietly treat it. The mainstream belief settles in gently but firmly. Victorians often link poor sleep to weak self-discipline, excessive imagination, or moral imbalance. If you can't sleep, perhaps you've lived incorrectly that day. You feel this judgment hovering in the air, even though no one says it out loud at bedtime. Advice manuals are careful with their language, but the message is clear enough. A well-ordered life produces a well-ordered night. Late dinners, stimulating conversation, emotional excess, or, worst of all, idle worrying are all accused of sabotaging sleep. You imagine a finger wagging somewhere in the darkness, and you suppress a smile. Apparently, even your thoughts are expected to follow curfew. This idea shapes the way insomnia cures are prescribed. Milk at dusk wasn't just nutrition, it was a sign you'd planned ahead. The evening walk wasn't merely exercise, it was restraint. The ticking clock isn't just sound, it's discipline made audible. You begin to see how these rituals double as quiet moral lessons. They teach you to slow down, behave predictably, and stay within acceptable emotional boundaries. Sleep, in this worldview, is the reward for good conduct. A light joke slips in as you imagine Victorian self-help books titled "Have You Tried Being Better?" Another follows when you realize how exhausting it must have been to feel guilty about being tired. The third arrives when you consider how modern people still blame themselves for sleeplessness. Just with better pillows and more apps. Some ideas, it seems, refuse to go to bed. Yet there's comfort here too. If insomnia is a result of behavior, then behavior can be adjusted. That means you're not broken, you're just temporarily out of alignment. This is why routines matter so much. They offer redemption in the form of predictability. You don't have to confront your deepest fears tonight, you just have to drink the milk. Take the walk, and listen to the clock. Tomorrow, you can try again. You recall conversations overheard earlier in the evening, where people spoke of sleep in hushed, reverent tones. Good sleepers are admired, even envied. They're seen as calm, reliable, and properly constituted. Poor sleepers are treated with sympathy tinged with suspicion. Are they overwrought? Too sensitive? Too imaginative? The word, nerves, does a lot of work here, absorbing blame without requiring much explanation. There's a quirky fringe idea circulating among certain circles that sleeplessness is a sign of excessive intelligence or creativity. These people suggest that the mind simply has too much to do to shut down on command. It's a flattering theory, and you notice how quickly it spreads among those lying awake. Still, it remains unofficial, whispered rather than endorsed. Respectable advice continues to emphasize moderation over brilliance. Historians still argue whether Victorian moralizing around sleep genuinely reflected medical understanding or simply mirrored broader social values of order and restraint. From where you're lying, it feels like both. Sleep becomes another arena where society practices shaping behavior. Gently but persistently. Even in the quiet, expectations hum. You turn slightly, adjusting the blanket, and notice how your body responds more readily than your thoughts. Muscles relax when given permission, the mind takes longer. The moral framing of insomnia adds weight to wakefulness, making each alert moment feel like a small failure. And yet, here you are, breathing steadily, doing everything right. If sleep doesn't arrive immediately, you decide, you won't take it personally tonight. That alone feels like progress. The clock ticks on, indifferent to your virtue. Milk has been drunk, the walk has been taken. You've behaved impeccably by Victorian standards. Or at least close enough. The night seems to acknowledge your effort, softening around the edges. Judgment fades, replaced by something more forgiving. You settle back, letting the idea go that sleep must be earned through perfection. Maybe it's enough to participate sincerely in the ritual, even if the result comes later than promised. The Victorians might not fully agree, but the bed doesn't argue. It simply waits. You remain where you are, but the room subtly changes character around you. The moral weight of sleep drifts into the background, replaced by fabric, furniture, and deliberate design. Victorian bedrooms are not accidental spaces, they are engineered for night. The mainstream fact settles in as you notice the details: heavy curtains, thick carpets, upholstered headboards, and layered bedding were all intended to block light, dampen sound, and cocoon the sleeper from the world. Darkness is no longer an absence, it's a construction project. You picture the drapes first. They are substantial, often velvet or wool, hanging in generous folds that swallow moonlight and street glow alike. Gaslights outside may flicker, but inside, their influence is muted to a faint suggestion. These curtains do more than block light, they signal closure. When they're drawn, the day is officially over. You feel the psychological shift even now, as if your mind recognizes the gesture and begins to power down accordingly. The bed itself is an object of serious intention. Mattresses are firm by modern standards, layered with horsehair or straw, topped with featherbeds that soften without swallowing you whole. The structure encourages stillness rather than sprawl. You lie there and notice how the bed supports you evenly, discouraging fidgeting. Whether this was designed for sleep or simply for durability is up for debate. But the effect is undeniable. A quirky tidbit floats through your thoughts. Some Victorians believe that sleeping with your head pointed north aligns the body with the Earth's magnetic field, promoting deeper rest. Bedrooms are rearranged with surprising conviction based on this idea. You imagine carpenters politely nodding as families insist on moving heavy bedsteads a few inches to satisfy unseen forces. Historians still argue whether this belief came from emerging science or lingering folklore. But it adds another layer to the sense that sleep is something you can engineer if you try hard enough. The air in the room feels different too. Windows are often kept slightly open, even in colder months, to allow what's called fresh night air to circulate. Stale air is suspected of stirring restlessness. You feel a faint coolness brush your cheek, just enough to contrast with the warmth of the blankets. The balance keeps you alert enough to be comfortable, but not awake enough to think. There's a quiet pride in these bedrooms. They reflect restraint and order, a belief that environment shapes behavior. You're not meant to be entertained here. There are no bright colors, no distracting patterns, no clutter demanding attention. Everything gently funnels you toward rest. Even the wallpaper tends to be subdued, its patterns repetitive enough to fade into the background when you stop focusing on them. A light joke drifts in as you imagine Victorian interior designers inventing the phrase, sleep hygiene, and charging extra for it. Another follows when you realize how much effort goes into creating a space whose primary function is unconsciousness. The third arrives when you consider that despite all this planning, people still lie awake staring at the ceiling, proving that even the best decor can't outwit the mind entirely. You notice the absence of mirrors near the bed. Some believe reflections at night unsettle the nerves or invite intrusive thoughts. Others simply prefer not to confront themselves when they're meant to disappear into sleep. Either way, the result is a room that doesn't ask you to perform. You're allowed to exist here without observation, which feels like a small mercy. Sound behaves differently in this space. The carpets muffle footsteps, the drapes soften echoes, and the walls absorb more than they reflect. Even the ticking clock from earlier seems gentler now, cushioned by fabric and distance. You realize how intentional quiet is, not silence, but controlled sound. The bedroom isn't meant to be empty, it's meant to be calm. There's an ongoing debate among Victorian thinkers about whether such enclosed, padded spaces might encourage lethargy or weaken the constitution. Some argue that too much comfort dulls the body's resilience. Others insist that rest requires safety. And safety requires softness. Historians still argue whether these concerns influenced design choices or merely reflected anxieties about comfort and progress. As you lie there, wrapped in layers, you feel firmly on the side of softness. Your body responds before your mind does. Shoulders sink, jaw loosens, fingers curl slightly into the sheets. You're aware of the room holding you. Not tightly, but attentively. It's doing its part, whatever else sleep requires. It helps to feel protected from interruption. The bedroom offers that promise. You think back briefly to the street outside, to the gaslights and passing carriages, and realize how distant they feel now. The heavy drapes have erased the city without erasing your sense of place. You're still in London, but London has agreed to wait until morning. That agreement, more than any single object in the room, feels like the true cure. The rituals continue without ceremony. You turn slightly, adjusting the pillow, and the bed accommodates you without protest. No creaks, no sharp edges. Everything here is designed to minimize surprise. Sleep, you're learning, doesn't appreciate surprises. As your thoughts slow, the bedroom fades into something less defined. It's no longer a collection of objects, it's an atmosphere. Darkness presses gently but not heavily. The night feels thick, safe, and uninterrupted. You don't need to think about sleep anymore. The room has taken over that responsibility. You let yourself rest in that knowledge, trusting that the environment is doing what it was built to do. Whether Victorian bedrooms truly cured insomnia or simply made wakefulness more tolerable is still debated. But in this moment, tolerable is enough. You're not fighting the night. You're letting it surround you. You don't quite fall asleep yet. Instead, your awareness drifts toward the small rituals that come just before surrender, the tonics. The drafts, the hopeful sips taken with measured faith. Somewhere on a bedside table or a nearby shelf sits a bottle. Modestly labeled, promising calm. The mainstream fact settles in. Victorian doctors frequently prescribed herbal tonics for insomnia. Blends containing ingredients like valerian, chamomile, hops, or lavender, believed to soothe the nerves and invite rest. You imagine the liquid catching the low light as it's poured, thick and faintly aromatic. You lift the glass and take a careful sip. It tastes earthy, slightly bitter, softened by honey or syrup. The bitterness feels important, as if seriousness itself has a flavor. You're instructed not to expect instant results. These remedies work, you're told, by gentle persuasion rather than force. They nudge the body toward sleep instead of dragging it there. You appreciate the framing. It feels respectful. Victorian medicine loves its plants. Long before synthetic sedatives, doctors looked to gardens and hedgerows for answers. Valerian root is a favorite, notorious for its smell but praised for its calming effect. Chamomile earns its place for being mild and agreeable, suitable even for the delicate. Hops, better known for beer, quietly cross over into sleep medicine, lending their drowsy reputation to the cause. You notice how often comfort and familiarity are part of the prescription. These are plants people already trust. A quirky tidbit drifts in as you remember hearing that some Victorians believe the effectiveness of a tonic depends on the phase of the moon when the herbs are harvested. Certain apothecaries swear by this, timing their preparations with quiet confidence. You smile, picturing shelves arranged not just by ingredient but by lunar calendar. Historians still argue whether such practices stemmed from lingering folk traditions or clever marketing. But they undeniably added a sense of ceremony to the cure. You settle back, letting the tonic warm your chest. The act of drinking it feels almost more important than its contents. It signals the final stage of the evening, the moment when effort gives way to trust. You've done what you can. Now, the rest is out of your hands. Or at least, that's the idea. Doctors, however, are not entirely united on these remedies. Some praise them enthusiastically, while others remain skeptical, warning against false hope. They argue in journals and lectures about dosage, purity, and placebo effects, though they don't use that word yet. Historians still argue whether these tonics truly altered sleep patterns or simply provided reassurance to anxious patients. Lying here, you suspect reassurance is doing most of the heavy lifting, and you're perfectly fine with that. A light joke slips in as you imagine a Victorian pharmacist saying, "It might work, but it will definitely taste medicinal." Another follows when you consider how many of these tonics are essentially bedtime tea with better branding. The third arrives when you think about modern supplement aisles, crowded with bottles promising calm, all descendants of this same hopeful tradition. You feel your eyelids droop, though not decisively. The tonic doesn't knock you out, it smooths the edges. Thoughts still appear, but they feel less sharp, more like clouds than sparks. You let them drift without engagement. There's no need to chase them away. They seem willing to leave on their own. The room remains still, supportive. Curtains hold the dark in place. The clock ticks gently, and the faint night air brushes your skin. The tonic becomes part of this layered approach. One more soft influence among many. You realize how rarely Victorians rely on a single solution. Sleep is approached from all sides: diet, movement, sound, environment, and now, chemistry drawn from plants. You take another slow breath and notice how your body responds more than your mind. Muscles loosen. The space between thoughts lengthens. You're not asleep, but you're closer. The pressure to succeed fades. If sleep comes now, good. If it comes later, that's acceptable too. The tonic has given you permission to stop trying so hard. Somewhere in the back of your awareness, a skeptical voice notes that many of these remedies would later be questioned or abandoned. But that voice feels distant, academic, unconcerned with your immediate comfort. Tonight, you're not here to evaluate efficacy. You're here to rest. You place the glass aside, carefully, as if noise itself might undo the progress you've made. The act feels final, a closing bracket on the day. The taste lingers faintly, mingling with the sense that the night is deepening whether you're awake to witness it or not. You lie still, letting the tonic and the rituals settle together. The effort of the day has been met with equal effort toward rest. And somewhere in that balance, sleep waits patiently. You don't reach for it. You let it approach. You're not thinking about the countryside. And yet it arrives anyway, quietly. Like a memory you didn't invite. The rhythm of the city softens further. And in its place comes an older schedule. One shaped by dawn and dusk rather than clocks. This is where the milkmaids return to the story. The mainstream fact eases in. Many Victorian sleep cures are inspired by rural routines. Especially the early, regular schedules of agricultural workers whose days begin before sunrise and end soon after sunset. Their sleep, people say, is deep and untroubled, earned by alignment with nature rather than negotiation with it. You picture the milkmaid rising in the dark, long before gaslights are extinguished, moving through fields still silvered with dew. Her day is physically demanding but predictably paced. There's comfort in knowing exactly when work begins and ends. By evening, fatigue arrives honestly, without debate. Urban reformers and doctors look at this life with a mixture of admiration and envy. If only city dwellers could borrow a little of that rhythm, perhaps sleep would come more easily. This idea filters into advice aimed squarely at people like you. Go to bed earlier, they say, wake earlier too, keep your hours regular, even on days when you're tempted to linger. The body, they insist, loves consistency. You're encouraged to imagine yourself as a kind of honorary milkmaid, minus the fields and cows. A light joke slips in as you picture yourself adopting a bonnet and announcing bedtime at sunset. Another follows when you realize how incompatible this advice is with city life that refuses to quiet down on schedule. The third arrives when you consider that even milkmaids probably have restless nights, despite the mythology built around them. Still, the appeal is strong. There's something soothing about a life governed by external cues rather than internal arguments. Victorian writers romanticize rural sleep, describing it as heavy, dreamless, and restorative. The city, by contrast, is blamed for fractured nights and overactive minds. Noise, light, and social obligations conspire against rest. Borrowing rural habits becomes a way to reclaim something lost. A quirky tidbit surfaces from a pamphlet you once glanced at. Some advisors suggest timing your bedtime according to when cows settle down for the night, arguing that animals instinctively know when it's best to sleep. You imagine checking in with livestock before turning in, nodding solemnly at their judgment. Historians still argue whether such advice reflects genuine belief in animal wisdom or a symbolic longing for simplicity. But it captures the mood perfectly. You feel the pull of routine now more than ever. The rituals you followed tonight, milk, walking, sound, darkness, tonic, all echo that rural predictability. They create a sequence your body can learn. You're no longer asking sleep to appear. You're setting the stage the same way every evening, hoping familiarity will do the rest. Your breathing deepens again, and you notice how the idea of an early morning no longer feels threatening. It feels distant, manageable. The night stretches comfortably ahead of you. Not endless, just sufficient. You think of the milkmaid finishing her day. Muscles tired, mind quiet, bed welcoming. That image settles somewhere deep, not as a comparison but as a suggestion. The room seems to approve of this shift. The clock ticks steadily, the air remains cool, and the bed holds you without comment. You're aware that you're borrowing an identity, a rural rhythm transplanted into an urban bedroom, but it works well enough. The body doesn't demand authenticity, it responds to cues. You let go of the city for a moment, even though it's still there beyond the drapes. Tonight, you're allowed to sleep like someone whose day followed a simple arc. Whether that arc was ever as perfect as Victorians imagined is up for debate. But the belief itself is powerful, and powerfully calming. You sink further into stillness, routine now carrying more weight than thought. The night feels orderly, almost kindly, and somewhere between the imagined fields and the real bed beneath you. Sleep edges closer, unannounced. You don't hear the factories directly from here, but you feel them anyway, like a low-pressure change in the atmosphere. Even as you lie still, the industrial city hums beneath the quiet, and Victorians are acutely aware of it. The mainstream fact settles in with a tired sigh, as factories spread through 19th century cities. Many people begin blaming new industrial noises, machinery, railways, late-night deliveries, for disturbed sleep. Insomnia, once framed as a personal failing, slowly acquires an external suspect. You imagine the soundscape beyond your curtained window. Somewhere, a steam engine exhales. Somewhere else, metal taps metal in a rhythm that doesn't care about bedtime. Even when you can't hear these sounds clearly, you know they exist, and that knowledge alone can keep the mind alert. Victorians talk about nervous anticipation, the idea that the expectation of noise is nearly as disruptive as the noise itself. You recognize that immediately. The body tenses in advance, waiting for interruption that may never come. This awareness gives rise to a new branch of sleep advice, counter noise. If the city insists on making unpredictable sounds, then perhaps predictable sounds can neutralize them. That ticking clock from earlier isn't just comforting now, it's defensive. It asserts a steady rhythm against the chaotic pulses of industry. You sense the logic settling in place. Order versus disorder, rhythm versus clatter. A light joke drifts in as you picture Victorians filing noise complaints against entire railways. Another follows when you imagine a factory owner responding politely, promising to make the steam engines whisper after midnight. The third arrives when you realize that every generation seems convinced it lives in the loudest era of all time. Some households take extra measures. Heavy rugs are layered not just for warmth, but to muffle vibrations from passing carts. Beds are moved away from shared walls. Bedrooms migrate to the back of houses, as far from the street as possible. Even architecture shifts subtly in response to sleep anxiety. The city doesn't get quieter, but people get better at hiding from it. There's a quirky fringe theory floating through certain medical circles that industrial noise actually jars the nerves loose, causing them to vibrate long after the sound has passed. These doctors describe nerves as delicate threads, easily shaken out of alignment by repetitive mechanical noise. The language is vivid, if not entirely precise. Historians still argue whether such descriptions reflect genuine neurological insight or metaphor standing in for discomfort with rapid change. You lie there, listening for sounds that don't arrive. The absence feels deliberate now, earned. The room has been arranged as a buffer zone between you and the city's restlessness. Curtains, carpets, distance, and ritual all conspire to create the impression that the outside world has agreed to pause. Whether or not that agreement is real, your body responds as if it is. There's also an emotional undercurrent to these concerns. Factories symbolize progress, productivity, and relentless motion. Everything sleep is not. To rest well feels almost rebellious in an age increasingly defined by output. You sense the tension Victorians live with, the desire to advance without sacrificing the ability to stop. Sleep cures become a way to reclaim stillness without rejecting progress outright. You breathe slowly, noticing how even your thoughts have adopted a gentler cadence. The idea of industrial noise fades into abstraction. It's something that happens elsewhere, to other people, at other times. Here, the night is contained. You don't need to solve the problem of the modern world tonight. You only need to exist quietly within it. Another debate murmurs beneath the surface. Some reformers argue that people will simply adapt to noise over time, growing accustomed to the sounds of machines as previous generations adapted to church bells and market cries. Others insist that the human nervous system has limits, and that too much mechanical regularity overwhelms it rather than soothing it. Historians still argue whether adaptation or mitigation played the larger role in improving urban sleep. But you're grateful for mitigation right now. The clock continues its patient work, asserting a small, human-scaled rhythm. Compared to the imagined thunder of factories, its ticking feels intimate, almost personal. It's a reminder that not all machines are enemies of rest. Some, when designed thoughtfully, become allies. You feel your body sink further into the mattress, weight redistributing without effort. The anxiety that once accompanied nighttime noise has loosened its grip. Even if a distant sound were to break through, You suspect it wouldn't disturb you much now. The groundwork has been laid. Calm has momentum. You think briefly about how these concerns echo forward in time, how later generations will worry about traffic. Radios, televisions, phones, the specifics change, but the desire remains the same, to carve out a pocket of quiet within an unquiet world. That continuity feels strangely comforting. You're part of a long line of people trying, night after night, to protect their sleep from the age they live in. The thought drifts away before it can sharpen. The night feels thicker, more settled. The factories, real or imagined, recede entirely. What remains is a controlled stillness, shaped by intention and habit. It's not perfect silence, but it's enough. You let yourself rest there, trusting that the city will keep moving without you for a few hours. That permission, to disengage, to stop listening for threats, is perhaps the most effective cure of all. And with that understanding, your awareness softens further, ready to slip into whatever comes next. You don't open your eyes, but pages begin to turn anyway, somewhere nearby, on a nightstand, a chair, or folded carefully at the foot of the bed, rests a book chosen not to excite you, but to exhaust you gently. The mainstream fact eases into place. Victorians often recommended light, calming reading before bed to tire the eyes and distract the mind without stirring strong emotion. The goal isn't engagement, it's gradual surrender. You imagine yourself propped slightly on pillows, lamp turned low, holding a volume with reassuring weight. The print is small, the sentences long, and the subject matter politely uneventful. Travelogues describing landscapes in careful detail. Sermons with steady cadence. Moral essays that circle their point without urgency. All are favored. The book isn't there to surprise you. It's there to occupy just enough of your attention to prevent wandering. Advice manuals warn against novels with cliffhangers or vivid drama. Strong feelings, they say, linger after the book is closed, replaying themselves in the dark. You smile at that, because it's painfully accurate. Instead, you're encouraged to read something improving. A word that here means sedating rather than inspiring. Improvement, at bedtime, is about narrowing the mind's focus until it naturally dims. A light joke drifts in as you imagine Victorian bestseller lists dominated by, most likely to induce drowsiness. Another follows when you realize how often people claim to read before bed and instead reread the same paragraph 5 times. The third arrives when you consider that falling asleep mid-sentence might be the highest compliment such books receive. You let your eyes trace a few lines. The words blur at the edges, not because they're difficult, but because they're doing their job. Descriptions repeat, arguments unfold slowly, predictably. There's no urgency to remember any of it. The book isn't asking you to carry it into tomorrow. It's content to stay here, dissolving as you do. There's a quirky tidbit whispered among certain households that reading aloud to yourself works better than silent reading. The sound of your own voice adding another layer of rhythm to the evening. You imagine murmuring a passage until the words tangle and fade. Historians still argue whether this practice genuinely improved sleep or simply reflected a culture more comfortable with spoken text. But the image itself is soothing. The lamp's glow is warm, deliberately weak. Bright light is discouraged, believed to stimulate the brain. You notice how your eyes grow heavy not from strain, but from lack of contrast. The world narrows to the page, then narrows again as the page begins to lose its edges. Reading becomes less about comprehension and more about permission, to stop thinking so actively. Eventually, the book slips from your fingers, not dramatically, but with a soft thump that barely registers. You don't reach for it. The advice is clear. When drowsiness arrives, you accept it immediately. No finishing the chapter. No one will know. The book has served its purpose. The lamp is turned down or extinguished, and darkness returns without ceremony. The thoughts that might have rushed in are slower now, dulled by prose that ask nothing of you. You lie still, feeling the afterimage of words dissolve into formless calm. You realize how intentional this habit is. Reading isn't entertainment here, it's a tool, as carefully chosen as the milk or the walk. Whether it truly induces sleep or simply makes wakefulness gentler is still debated. But tonight, gentler is enough. Your breathing evens out again, and the night settles back into place. The book waits patiently where it fell, unconcerned with whether you remember a single sentence. Sleep, like a bookmark you didn't notice placing, slips in quietly. You don't move much, but movement still finds you. Not the kind that wakes you, not the kind that demands effort, just enough to remind the body that it exists. Victorian advice slips back into your awareness in the form of gentle indoor exercise. The sort meant to release restlessness without stirring energy. The mainstream fact settles in. Doctors of the era often recommend mild stretching or slow calisthenics in the evening, especially for those whose days involve sitting, studying, or repetitive labor. The body, they believe, needs a final conversation before it can be quiet. You imagine rising from the bed for a moment, feet touching the carpet, the room still dim, movements are simple and deliberate, arms lift and lower, shoulders roll once or twice. The goal is not strength, not improvement, not even flexibility, it's circulation. Blood must finish its rounds. Nerves must be reassured that nothing urgent remains. You're advised to stop well before fatigue, because exhaustion excites rather than soothes. Balance again, always balance. These exercises are often performed in silence or accompanied by soft, steady sounds, the ticking clock, your own breathing, perhaps the faint rustle of fabric. There's no counting aloud, no competitive instinct. You're not measuring progress. You're emptying yourself of leftover motion. You notice how even a small stretch changes your posture, how tension you didn't know you were holding loosens its grip. A light joke drifts in as you picture Victorian fitness manuals titled "Moves That Won't Wake You Up." Another follows when you imagine doing these stretches in full nightwear, candle nearby, hoping not to trip over a rug. The third arrives when you realize that despite all the talk of gentleness, someone somewhere absolutely turned this into an overly elaborate routine. Some physicians favor what they call passive movement, encouraging patients to let gravity do the work, leaning gently against a wall, bending forward slowly, allowing the spine to lengthen without effort. The body, they argue, knows how to settle if you stop interfering. You feel the truth of that as your weight redistributes naturally, muscles responding without instruction. There's a quirky tidbit tucked into the margins of one medical pamphlet. Certain doctors claim that stretching the hands and fingers before bed improves sleep by releasing mental tension. Because the hands are thought to mirror the state of the mind. You flex your fingers once, experimentally, and decide that even if the theory is questionable, the sensation is pleasant. Historians still argue whether these ideas reflect early psychosomatic thinking or simple metaphor. But the comfort they offer is real enough. You return to the bed without haste. The movements have been minimal, but their effect lingers. Your limbs feel heavier now, more settled. The faint restlessness that sometimes hums beneath the skin has quieted, as if reassured that it's been acknowledged. You didn't ignore the body tonight, you listened briefly, then invited it to rest. There's an ongoing debate in Victorian circles about whether evening movement is beneficial at all. Some warn that any activity too close to bedtime risks waking the system fully. Others insist that inactivity is worse, trapping energy where it can ferment into anxiety. Historians still argue which camp had better results, but the advice you're following tonight leans firmly toward moderation. Nothing extreme, nothing abrupt. You lie back, noticing how easily the mattress accepts you now. There's less shifting, less searching for the right position. The body seems to recognize that the checklist is nearly complete. Milk, walk, sound, darkness, tonic, reading, movement, each step layered gently atop the last. No single action demanded sleep. Together, they've made wakefulness feel unnecessary. Your thoughts drift lazily, unstructured. You're not replaying the day or planning the next. The mind seems content to float without direction. Buoyed by physical comfort, you breathe in slowly, out even more slowly, without consciously counting. The clock keeps time so you don't have to. You sense how different this feels from forcing yourself to be still. Stillness arrived naturally once the body was satisfied. That realization feels important, though you don't pursue it. Tonight isn't about insight, it's about easing the system into silence. Somewhere, a Victorian doctor would nod approvingly at your restraint. You didn't overdo it, you didn't skip it either. You found the narrow path between stimulation and stagnation. Whether that doctor truly understood the mechanisms at work is open to debate. But the result speaks quietly for itself. The room feels warmer now, though the air hasn't changed. That warmth comes from within, from muscles no longer braced, from joints no longer held in readiness. You sink deeper into the bed, weight spreading evenly, as if you've been gently poured into place. You don't think about sleep anymore. You don't wonder when it will arrive or how long it will take. The body has taken over the negotiations. The mind, relieved of responsibility, drifts toward the background. As your awareness softens, the idea of movement fades entirely. What remains is a sense of completion, as if the day has been folded neatly and set aside. The night stretches ahead, unremarkable and safe, and somewhere within that calm, sleep waits, unhurried, confident that you're finally ready. You don't rush the next step. It arrives with steam and porcelain, with the quiet ceremony of water poured and waiting. Somewhere nearby, a bath has been prepared, not hot, not cold, but carefully debated. The mainstream fact settles in as you ease closer to it. Victorian doctors often recommend warm baths in the evening to relax muscles and calm the nerves, believing that water could coax the body toward sleep if used correctly. Used incorrectly, however, it might do the opposite. Temperature matters, timing matters, everything matters, but gently. You lower yourself in slowly, letting the water meet you without surprise. The sensation is immediate but not shocking. Muscles that have been carrying the day's posture begin to soften, and the weight you've been holding seems to dissolve outward into the bath. Advice columns caution against lingering too long. This is not leisure, but preparation. 10 minutes, perhaps 15, enough to relax, not enough to invigorate. Balance again, quietly enforced. Victorian thinkers love to argue about heat. Some insist that warm water draws blood toward the skin, relieving internal congestion and encouraging rest. Others warn that too much warmth overstimulates circulation, leaving the sleeper flushed and restless. You smile faintly at the thought of heated debates conducted in calm prose. Historians still argue whether these disagreements reflect early physiological insight or simply different tolerances dressed up as theory. For you, the water feels just right. The bath is more than physical relief, it's a psychological threshold. You're literally washing the day away, signaling to yourself that activity is finished. Soap scents the air lightly, lavender, perhaps, or something clean and unobtrusive. Strong fragrances are discouraged at night. They excite the senses. Everything about this ritual aims to reduce input, to narrow the range of sensation until the body has fewer reasons to stay alert. A light joke drifts in as you imagine Victorian households arguing over who used the last of the hot water and therefore got the best sleep. Another follows when you consider how luxurious this cure sounds compared to earlier eras. The third arrives when you realize that even now, people argue endlessly about ideal shower temperatures before bed. Some debates never cool down. You rest your head back briefly, careful not to soak too deeply. There are warnings about dizziness, about relaxing too completely. Sleep is the goal, not fainting. The body must remain gently in charge. You notice how the warmth makes your limbs feel heavier, more willing to settle later. It's not drowsiness exactly, more like the absence of resistance. There's a quirky fringe belief circulating among certain physicians that alternating warm and slightly cooler water improves sleep by training the nerves to respond calmly to change. You imagine dutifully splashing cooler water at the end of the bath, bracing yourself with exaggerated seriousness. Historians still argue whether such practices offered genuine benefit or simply satisfied a Victorian love of discipline. But the image itself is oddly bracing. You step out carefully, wrapped quickly in a towel or robe. The air feels cooler now, and the contrast deepens the sense of calm rather than disrupting it. The body registers the shift and responds by conserving heat. Drawing inward, you dry slowly, deliberately, avoiding any brisk motions that might undo the work. Even drying becomes part of the ritual. The return to the bedroom feels different this time. The bed looks inviting rather than expectant. You slide beneath the covers, warmth building naturally without effort. Muscles that might have twitched or protested earlier remain quiet. The bath has spoken to them in a language they understand. There's still debate. Of course, some Victorians argue that baths too close to bedtime cause nightmares or restless dreams. Others swear by them, claiming the best sleep of their lives follows a warm soak. Historians still argue which accounts are more reliable, complicated by the fact that expectations shape experience. If you believe the bath will help, it often does. If you fear it won't, that fear finds a way to stay awake. Tonight, belief feels easy. You're not demanding results. You're participating in a sequence that has carried you gently this far. The bath was one more soft handoff, passing responsibility from thought to sensation. You notice how little there is to think about now. The mind idles without complaint. The clock ticks faintly in the background, but it no longer feels central. Sound, warmth, and stillness blend into something cohesive. You feel tucked into the night rather than exposed to it. The earlier worries about noise, morality, routine, they've all softened into background texture. You adjust the blanket once, then stop. There's no need to search for perfection. The body seems satisfied. The bath has smoothed whatever edges remained, and the bed completes the process without ceremony. Sleep is no longer something you're waiting for. It's something that's already begun in small, subtle ways. Your breathing deepens again, each exhale slightly longer than the last. The warmth from the bath lingers like an echo, reassuring and dulling. You don't review the day. You don't plan tomorrow. The mind drifts, unprompted, toward images without narrative. Water, steam, soft light fading. Somewhere, a Victorian doctor would likely caution moderation one last time. Don't bathe too often. Don't rely on it exclusively. Don't expect miracles. You agree silently. Tonight isn't about miracles. It's about easing the body into a state where sleep feels like the obvious next step rather than a demand. The night accepts you quietly. The bathwater is gone, but its effect remains, settling you deeper into stillness. And as the warmth slowly evens out, your awareness thins, leaving only the simplest sensation of being supported, safe, and ready to rest. You don't see the clockmaker, but you feel his presence in the room. It's there in the precision of the ticking, in the quiet confidence that time is being handled for you. The idea settles gently into your awareness. Victorians place enormous trust in timekeeping. Not just to organize work, but to regulate the body itself. The mainstream fact eases in. Many people believe that regular exposure to consistent time signals, especially in the evening, can train the body into predictable cycles of rest and wakefulness. The clock isn't just measuring sleep, it's teaching it. You imagine the craftsman who assembled the mechanism, fitting gears together by hand, calibrating each movement to behave reliably. There's something soothing about that care. The clock doesn't rush or hesitate. It doesn't speed up when you're anxious or slow down when you're tired. It just continues. That consistency feels like a promise. Whatever you're feeling, time will carry on without asking you to manage it. Victorian writers speak of educating the nerves, and clocks are considered helpful instructors. Hearing the same rhythm night after night is thought to condition the body, encouraging it to anticipate rest at a certain hour. You feel that anticipation now, subtle but present. It's not excitement, it's readiness. Like standing in line knowing your turn is approaching. You don't fidget as much. A light joke drifts in as you imagine clockmakers advertising their products as sleep aids. Another follows when you consider how disastrous a miscalibrated clock would be for your entire routine. The third arrives when you realize how deeply unsettling it is when a familiar clock suddenly stops, proof that even calm depends on trust. Some physicians go further, suggesting that winding the clock at the same time every evening reinforces the ritual. The act becomes a signal, a small ceremony marking the transition from day to night. You picture yourself turning the key slowly, listening to the faint resistance, then releasing it with care. The sound is brief, mechanical, final. The night is officially underway. There's a quirky fringe idea circulating in certain journals that the materials used in clocks, brass, wood, steel, emit subtle influences that affect the sleeper. Brass is said to encourage warmth and calm, steel, alertness. You smile at the thought of choosing bedroom clocks based on metallurgy. Historians still argue whether such claims were sincere belief or decorative speculation. But they reveal how seriously people considered the relationship between environment and sleep. You lie still, noticing how little you feel compelled to check the time. That urge has faded. The clock is doing its job well enough that you don't need to verify it. This is perhaps its greatest service, relieving you of vigilance. When you stop monitoring time, the night opens up, minutes lose their edges, hours become indistinct. The clock's face, faintly visible in the low light, doesn't demand attention. Roman numerals, evenly spaced, give the impression of order without urgency. There's no glowing display, no sudden chime. Victorian advice often warns against striking clocks in bedrooms, claiming the noise disrupts sleep even if you don't fully wake. Silence between ticks is as important as the sound itself. There's an ongoing debate among thinkers of the era about whether too much regularity dulls the mind. Some worry that rigid schedules turn people into automatons, slaves to routine. Others argue that freedom begins only after basic rhythms are secured. Historians still argue where the truth lies. But tonight, routine feels like kindness rather than constraint. You feel the clock's rhythm blending with your own. Breathing slows, heartbeat steadies. The body seems to recognize a familiar pattern and settle into it without negotiation. This isn't about control anymore. It's about alignment. You're not forcing yourself to sleep. You're drifting into a groove that's been worn smooth by repetition. The room feels timeless now, even though time is being carefully kept. That paradox doesn't bother you. It comforts you. You don't need to know where you are in the night. You only need to know that it's moving gently forward. The idea that sleep can be learned, practiced, and supported by objects feels less strange the longer you lie here. The clock isn't magic, it's consistent, and consistency, you're learning, is one of the most soothing things a restless mind can encounter. You let the ticking fade further into the background. No longer a sound you're listening to, but a texture the night is made of. The clockmaker's work continues without supervision, freeing you to stop paying attention altogether. Your thoughts loosen. drifting without shape or sequence. You don't follow them, you don't push them away. The clock holds the structure of the night so you don't have to. And with that responsibility lifted, you sink deeper into stillness, content to let time pass unnoticed. You're not alone in this bed. Even if the room is quiet, social class settles into the space with you, an invisible presence shaping who sleeps where and how. The mainstream fact eases in as naturally as a sigh. In Victorian society, experiences of insomnia and its cures differ sharply across class lines. The wealthy discuss sleep in parlors and pamphlets, servants negotiated in narrow hours between duties. Everyone wants rest, but not everyone is allowed the same conditions for it. You imagine the servants' quarters first, small rooms tucked near kitchens or attics, close enough to hear bells and footsteps at all hours. Sleep here is fragmented, practical, and rarely discussed as a philosophical problem. When you lie down, it's because you must. There's little room for ritual beyond exhaustion itself. Advice about milk walks and gentle reading sounds faintly absurd from this vantage point. Still, even here, small habits emerge: a consistent hour, a familiar corner of the bed, a warm blanket that signals safety. In contrast, the middle and upper classes turn sleep into a project. They have the space, time, and resources to experiment with cures. Bedrooms are private sanctuaries rather than shared necessities. Insomnia becomes something to analyze, manage, and gently complain about. You feel the difference immediately. In your current position, curtains drawn, clock ticking, you're participating in a version of sleep care that assumes leisure. That realization doesn't disturb you, it simply adds texture. A light joke drifts in as you imagine servants rolling their eyes at elaborate bedtime routines. Another follows when you consider how many pamphlets about sleep are written by people who clearly don't have to wake before dawn to scrub floors. The third arrives when you realize that even now, advice about good sleep hygiene often assumes a certain level of comfort and control. Yet ideas do travel downward, softened and adapted. Milk as a calming drink appears in kitchens long before it's praised in medical journals. Regular hours, when possible, become valued across households. The notion that sleep benefits from predictability crosses class boundaries easily because it aligns with lived experience. Even without velvet curtains or herbal tonics, the body recognizes routine. There's a quirky tidbit whispered in memoirs of the era. Some servants deliberately synchronize their sleep schedules with the household clocks, finding comfort in knowing exactly when the family rests. The shared rhythm, even without shared space, creates a sense of order. Historians still argue whether this reflects genuine solidarity or simply survival within rigid hierarchies. But the effect on sleep appears real enough. You lie still, thinking about how expectations shape rest. For some, sleeplessness is a topic of conversation, even mild embarrassment. For others, it's just another challenge absorbed into daily labor. The moral tone we noticed earlier lands differently depending on who's listening. Being bad at sleep carries more weight when you have the luxury to worry about it. The bed beneath you feels like a privilege now, not in a guilt-laden way, but in a grounded one. Comfort isn't universal, but the desire for rest is. That shared desire stretches across class lines. Even if the means differ, you feel connected to all of it: the careful routines of the well-off, the pragmatic collapse of the exhausted, and the countless variations in between. Another debate murmurs beneath these reflections. Some Victorian reformers argue that improving workers' living conditions will naturally improve sleep and, by extension, moral behavior. Others claim character must come first. Historians still argue which view influenced policy more strongly, but you can feel the truth leaning toward environment. Where and how you sleep matters. Your thoughts drift toward simplicity. The more elaborate the routine, the more fragile it can become. Strip things back far enough, and sleep often finds a way. The clock ticks on, impartial to status. The night doesn't discriminate. Darkness arrives for everyone, eventually. You settle deeper into the bed, letting these ideas fade without resolving them. Tonight isn't about justice or reform. It's about acknowledging the layers of history that brought these rituals to you and then letting them go. You don't need to carry the weight of the whole society into sleep. The room remains steady, supportive. Whatever your place in the Victorian hierarchy tonight, you're allowed this moment of rest. The thought loosens something inside you, and the night feels a little wider, a little kinder. You don't notice the shift at first. It arrives quietly, like a new idea entering the room without announcing itself. Somewhere between the ticking clock and the steady rise and fall of your breath, Victorian certainty gives way to something more tentative. The mainstream fact eases in. By the late 19th century, Early psychological theories begin to influence how insomnia is understood, reframing sleeplessness as something rooted not only in habits or morals, but in the mind itself. Nerves, dreams, anxieties, these become subjects of careful curiosity rather than quiet judgment. You sense this change in tone immediately. The advice you've followed tonight hasn't disappeared, but it feels less absolute now. Doctors and thinkers start asking why the mind refuses rest even when the body is prepared. They speak of mental overactivity, of thoughts looping beyond usefulness, of imagination refusing to dim. You recognize that description with a small, tired smile. It feels familiar, personal. These early psychological ideas are cautious, almost apologetic. There's no sweeping declaration that the mind is in charge. Instead, there's gentle speculation. Perhaps insomnia arises when thoughts remain unfinished. Perhaps dreams are the mind's attempt to resolve what the day left open. Perhaps the act of worrying about sleep is itself the greatest obstacle to it. You feel these possibilities settle around you without pressure, like hypotheses that don't demand immediate answers. A light joke drifts in as you imagine Victorians discovering the concept of overthinking and reacting with collective relief. Another follows when you picture someone earnestly analyzing their dreams by candlelight at 2 in the morning. The third arrives when you realize that even today, people lie awake googling why they can't sleep, reenacting this same curiosity with brighter screens. There's a quirky fringe idea circulating among certain thinkers that dreams function as a nightly clearing house for emotional residue. According to this view, sleep arrives more easily when the mind feels permitted to wander freely. Without censorship, suppressing thoughts too aggressively, they warn, only gives them more energy. You lie there, letting thoughts drift without trying to catch them, and notice how quickly they lose their urgency when left alone. Historians still argue whether these ideas represent genuine psychological insight or philosophical poetry dressed as science. But the approach feels surprisingly modern. The moral weight we felt earlier softens further. Insomnia is no longer framed solely as a failure of discipline. It becomes something to understand rather than correct. That shift feels like a release. You don't have to earn sleep through perfection. You're allowed to be human, unfinished, a little messy in your thoughts. You notice how the room supports this gentler attitude. The clock still ticks, but it doesn't feel instructional anymore. It's simply there. The bed remains steady, unconcerned with what's happening in your head. The rituals you've followed haven't been invalidated. They've been recontextualized. They're tools, not tests. Your thoughts drift into images rather than sentences now. Half-formed memories, soft impressions, moments without narrative. You don't analyze them. You don't try to interpret them. The early psychologists would approve of this restraint, even if they couldn't quite explain why it works. The mind, given permission to roam, often finds its own quiet. Another debate murmurs beneath the calm. Some thinkers worry that focusing too much on the mind creates new anxieties, turning sleep into a psychological puzzle. Others believe awareness is the first step toward peace. Historians still argue which perspective proved more helpful. But lying here, you sense that tonight doesn't require a verdict. Awareness without urgency seems to be enough. You feel the edges of wakefulness blur. The mind loosens its grip on sequence and logic. There's no sharp transition, just a gradual thinning of thought. The early psychologists might call this the hypnagogic state. You simply experience it as relief. Nothing needs your attention right now. The night feels deeper, quieter, more internal. External routines have done their work. Now, the mind is invited to rest in its own way. Without instruction, you don't watch for sleep anymore. You let it approach from whatever angle it prefers. As awareness fades, the idea settles that sleep isn't something you command or solve. It's something you allow. That understanding, whispered rather than declared, carries you closer to the edge than any rule ever could. You don't mark the moment when the lamps begin to fade. You simply notice that the room has grown softer around the edges. This is how the night finishes its work. The mainstream fact settles in like a final blanket. By the late Victorian period, many insomnia cures quietly stop being cures at all and become habits, ordinary, repeated behaviors folded into daily life until they no longer feel medicinal. Sleep, in this understanding, arrives not through intervention, but through familiarity. You sense how everything you've done tonight has thinned into routine. Milk at dusk is no longer a treatment. It's just what evenings taste like. The walk isn't prescribed, it's expected. The clock doesn't instruct, it accompanies. Bedrooms don't perform, they simply exist as night spaces. The language of cure gives way to the language of custom. You're no longer trying to sleep. You're living in a way that makes sleep unremarkable. Victorian writers begin to reflect this shift without quite announcing it. Advice columns grow shorter. Instructions soften. The certainty that once demanded precise timings and moral explanations gives way to reassurance. If sleep doesn't come immediately, that's all right. It often arrives later, unannounced. Once attention drifts elsewhere, you feel that truth in your body now. There's no pressure left to resolve anything. A light joke drifts in as you imagine Victorian doctors slowly realizing they've talked themselves out of a job. Another follows when you consider how anticlimactic this ending is. No grand solution. Just repetition. The third arrives when you realize that the most effective cure they found was boredom. Delivered gently and consistently. There's a quirky tidbit tucked into diaries of the era. Some people stop tracking their sleep altogether once routine takes over, judging rest by how they feel rather than how long they think they slept. Historians still argue whether this reflects genuine improvement or a lowering of expectations. But the effect is calming either way. Measurement fades. Experience remains. You lie still, not because you've been told to, but because stillness feels like the natural state now. The room no longer presents itself as an environment to manage. It's simply there, holding you without comment. The clock's ticking is barely distinguishable from your own pulse. The boundary between sound and silence blurs. You sense the night stretching ahead, wide and forgiving. There's no finish line. Sleep doesn't arrive with a signal or an announcement. It drifts in sideways, often while you're thinking about something else entirely, or nothing at all. That understanding loosens the last bit of tension you didn't realize you were holding. The city outside continues, but it's no longer relevant. Factories, streets, schedules, they all recede into abstraction. What remains is the immediate, quiet fact of being supported. The bed, the dark, the steady air. You don't need to participate anymore. Everything that needed doing has already been done. Your breathing deepens almost imperceptibly. Thoughts no longer form sentences. They appear as sensations, then dissolve. There's no need to follow them. The night doesn't require witnesses. And so the rituals that once felt deliberate now fade into the background. Absorbed into who you are at this hour. Victorian insomnia cures, after all, do not end with triumph. They end with disappearance, of effort, of concern, of awareness itself. Wind down, final 300 words. Now the night slows even further, as if it has decided not to hurry you along. The room feels distant and close at the same time. Its edges softened beyond definition. You're no longer listening for anything in particular. Sounds arrive and leave without leaving marks. The clock ticks, or maybe it doesn't. It hardly matters now. Your body rests into itself, heavy in the most comfortable way. Breathing becomes automatic, unobserved. Each exhale carries a little more of the day away, and nothing rushes in to replace it. The quiet isn't empty, it's padded, layered, safe, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask questions. Thoughts slow into fragments, then into impressions, a sense of warmth, a memory without detail, a feeling of being exactly where you're meant to be, with nowhere else required. The mind stops scanning, the body stops waiting. You don't need to fall asleep. You don't need to do anything at all. The night knows how to finish this without your help. It has done it before. Countless times. Patiently, gently, without spectacle. If sleep has already arrived, you won't notice. And if it hasn't yet, that's perfectly fine too. There's no urgency here, no expectation. Just the steady permission to let go whenever you're ready. The room holds you. The night carries you. Everything else can wait. End of script. Sweet dreams.